Okay, so this is the, what's our date today?
October 4th.
The 4th, October 4th, Conservation and Forest Committee. Call to order at 7:10. And
Now you can.
now I can just talk. Okay. We haven't met for such a long time through COVID that I was hoping to use tonight to just get everyone back up to speed with where we left off. But we also, according to Jen, do have our duty that our committee positions needed to be re-elected once a year. So with COVID having happened and not met for such a long time, upon the first feasible, which is to say more than just maybe 3 of us out of 5, we need to re-elect. But whether or not we feel comfortable about doing that, if we don't have a full committee here to do so, I suppose is up to us to decide. According to Jen, we have 5. Wes is out. Wes elected, I think he was re-elected at the town meeting in June, but elected not to come back. So for your record keeping, she has notified the selectmen that they're looking for another appointee.
Okay, wait. So we have,
So right now, we have the 4 of us and Andy, so.
okay. I'm
Mark
sorry,
Hurd.
I don't know your name.
Mark Hurd?
Mark, oh, okay. You were sitting next to me the last time. So that's- turn your head. Mark Hurd, sorry, Mark.
Was what, a year and a half ago, 2 years
Yeah.
ago?
That's right, it's been a long time.
Okay. So Andy's, so that would make 5 of us, right?
Yeah. So we're 5 with Andy, yep,
Yeah, okay.
exactly. So again, where we go with this tonight was just a refamiliarization as far as I was concerned, and if we had questions or concerns over how many of us were here at a time that we should or shouldn't re-elect the positions, I'm open to any discussion about that. Meaning if there were only, technically speaking, 3 of us as a quorum, but I don't think 3 of us should sit around and re-elect the positions amongst the 3 of us, if you follow my drift. So, again, I'm really open to discussion on that, or how that would go procedurally, or just to make sure that everyone understands what the value of the full quorum is to do so.
Is this a 5-member committee or a 6-member committee?
It's currently a 5-member committee, but if you go back into the books, I think we were short 1 even before that.
Okay.
I've got records that talk about, certain numbers are 1 year and certain numbers are 2 years, but I came about somewhere just short of a year previous to COVID in helping to take over for Carl Davis, whose wife got cancer, and we just simply had a vote then as to say, is it okay if Steve picks up where I left off? And it was fine at that time, but obviously we've gone farther than a year at this point now, so.
Still
Looking for-
fine to me.
Well, again, that's entirely up to the committee
I
itself,
think
so.
with 4 people, we have enough of a majority to make those nominations, and
Okay,
so I nominate you as chair.
I second the motion.
okay. So that would be an abstain from me. Do you have a second? And
second.
call for a vote, I guess. You guys can,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
thank you for the procedure.
0-1. Okay.
And then in that case, are you looking for a new nomination again, Mike, for secretary? Okay,
I don't mind doing it.
Okay.
I nominate Mike.
Okay.
I second the motion.
okay. What do we have for a vote? I call for a vote. Sorry,
All in favor?
thank you.
Okay.
I need support.
No other officers, right? That's it.
Okay,
Good.
okay,
Business.
so we have gotten some old business taken care of. I'll report that back to Jen,
Okay.
and we'll submit that within the minutes at the next meeting for review. where we had left off with some old business. Go ahead, please.
I sent out if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
I sent out the minutes, I sent out 3 minutes, one of them was a duplicate of another, because the date was screwy, so disregard that. Is that format suitable to everybody?
It certainly works. The last one that I had, Mike, was from the February 11th of 2020, is that correct?
That's what I have, yeah.
I have one from January, I have one from February, and I have one from November of the year before.
This should be, yeah.
Okay?
Are that format suitable?
No, great. Yep, for sure.
I'll try to do it again until
Duplicate until someone says otherwise.
the laptop dies. Sorry to interrupt.
Nope. I brought with me a few copies of the Conservation and Forest Committee report that I put together for Jen. If you hadn't seen it within warrant articles and such. But as far as any business having been conducted, that's really about the only thing that she had requested of me over COVID, was to try to keep the committee report put together for the selectmen and for the warrant. So I don't presume that we actually have anything to go over for old minutes of the last meeting. That's this. We don't have to, procedurally speaking, we're not approving the minutes from the previous meeting.
Are we going to carry over the new business? An agenda item was suggested for the next meeting that we have for committee to develop a proposed timeline for gathering public input.
That is my thought, yes.
Okay.
So because of the timeline of where we left off at this February meeting, we were having discussions on the adopt and implement discussion of the town forestry plan that I was asked to put together for the town and submit. It had come to the committee, and the selectmen have been looking for recommendations from the committee to kick it upstairs, so to speak, as far as what to do to adopt or implement this plan. And we started diving into the idea of, was the commissioning of the plan and the accepting of the plan an adoption of the plan, and to what extent that allowed us to move forward or not move forward, and what was the procedure to do so. So if you look at the minutes of February 11th, in that longer statement number 3, it really describes where we left off, and immediately after that was when COVID hit and it was the last meeting. So in talking with Jen, this was about at the time that we were really on a very short deadline to put a warrant article together for the June meeting. But because we did not have a consensus and we weren't meeting any longer at that point, that's really just where we left off. So the adopting of that, the continuation of this from that point is what I would look to do.
Okay.
And, you know, we can then start talking about that again and rebooting and trying to find out about bringing something back to the, you know, town meeting of June 2022. I brought, Mike and Mark have seen copies of the forestry plan. I don't know if you've seen one.
I have not.
I brought one with me, but I've given the town a digital copy of everything as well. So if you want to go look at that, or I can lend you the one copy that I have here. But again, I've got digital things I can forward to you as well, if that's a little bit easier for you.
Digital is always easier
Yep.
for me.
So what we had done,
So was the question that the town accepted it, that meant it was golden, or that's the question?
well, that was really the question. Well, what Jen had essentially put that back to us.
I see.
See, we had asked Jen to go to the selectmen to say, what is the procedure to either use this plan and enact it on the ground? And to what extent approval was needed and by what body? And again, her concept, come back from the selectmen, had been, we don't want to move on anything until it comes out of committee with the recommendation to do so. So then that's really where we left, because again, we had, in this second statement, we had a little bit of the discussion about public input to the plan. For your knowledge, Kelly, the way the process had worked is the plan was commissioned to be written on the town forest property. I don't know if you've seen where that piece is or familiar with it. And upon doing the field work, which is what I call, it's the gathering of the data. It's gathering of all the baseline information. And when I try to relay it to landowners as a forester, what I try to call that is, I now know what the town has in this property. I know its assets, I know its strengths, I know its weaknesses. And then the question is, well, what would one do with this property if you elect to do something at all? So at that point in time, I want to say that there was 3 meetings of as many as 10 people out on the ground with the data, crawling around on the property. We found some cemetery things. We looked at some old foundation parts and checked out a lot of different assets that the property had. And then, from input from those people, you then go back through as a forester, and I asked for what I call like a goals statement for this property. So I had the what, I had the information of what the town was looking to do, and then I tried to write that into the forestry management plan. So the plan was written, the plan was brought back to the committee, brought back to the town, and that's really the latest that we've had on it. So from a forester's point of view, there will always be public input into what happens on the property, but at a certain point in time, you do need to have someone implement the
actual plan.
procedure and the actual plan.
Right.
So where we were tripping up and really kind of getting lost in the weeds in the verbiage was the adoption of the plan a consensus to move forward and do work on the property? And the answer we decided was no, not overly. We still have to bring a recommendation out of the committee back to the selectmen. And then the question would be is, do we make then a warrant article that says we would like to, quote unquote, adopt and implement the plan? So that was really where we left off.
So our next step is to make a warrant article.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So by all means, like I said, I've got information from you for your email. I can forward anything to you that way, just in
That
a
would be
big old
great.
blob of a
That's what I
file,
can-
and you can print it out on your
Yeah.
own. And if you have any questions, feel free to just ask me. Since I was the one that wrote it, I have pretty intimate knowledge of the piece as well.
Great.
And then, like I said, I'll have to get back to Jen in order to refamiliarize myself with the yearly calendar as far as when the warrant articles come about. But since this is where we left off in February of last year, presumably about the same timetable again this year, we'll be putting something together for June.
Yeah, by
Right.
June, yeah.
So if we're here in October now, you know, we have a few months to talk about these things and how one would go about doing that, and then putting something together.
Good.
Any other thoughts on that, guys? How that would work, or specificities of it?
I think the plan has some broad goals, and based on the data that you collected and what that indicated, might lend itself to forest, recreation, wildlife, those areas. And I think what we were talking about at the last meeting is, you know, let's get down to specifics, you know, are we gonna push the wildlife habitat or the recreation? Do we want ATVs? Do we want hiking trails? Do you want to just section off areas for harvesting and other areas for recreation, like the cemetery area in the corner next to the
Sure.
road? That should be, in my mind,
Oh, yeah,
protected.
for sure.
And
Yeah.
with maybe some signage there. in the cellar hole areas should be protected, and maybe some cleanup work.
Right. Yep.
So I think those specifics is what we were kind of beating around last
sure.
time. And then how do we develop those specifics? Do we have walks on the property open for the public? Do we invite public comment into here? You know, I think that's where we were getting kind of
Okay.
hung up.
Bogged down a little bit, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Isn't that the whole purpose of the Conservation Committee, to do that?
Right.
I would think so.
Right.
I mean, they should authorize the committee to do that, implement it.
Well, and that's really where, again, we kind of hit a bit of a stumbling block at that point, was at some point in time, upon identifying these things, and given the goal of the comprehensive plan, and then this committee's duty to uphold the comprehensive plan, how does one go about doing that? Well, so we can talk about those things specifically, but for sure, like you're saying, Mike, you know, identify those things. And obviously, you can look at things and say, you know, here we have a very specific and very, you know, fragile habitat. So so you have the reasons for immediately bisecting out certain things, whether they be cultural or the homestead or, you know, vernal pool areas or the, you know, bog with heron rookery, anything like that in the back, any of those things like that. So upon going around on a map and going, you know, this area, this area, this area, and this area, you know, protection, less conservation, more preservation on those sections.
Right.
And then we have the areas that could be considered more the working forest style sections. And then within that, then we talk about, if this stand has this type of timber on it, what is it quote unquote growing for wildlife right now, or trees? And where could it go, or how could it be improved toward different goals? And that really is where I think we have to get to the specifics, like Mark says, within the committee,
Right.
to say, you can't be having, for example, go to town meeting to say that you know, clearing which benefits a ruffed grouse is going to be 1/4 of an acre of this and not 1/4 plus 10 extra feet over. Sooner or later, you have to have a consensus that says, here's where the knowledge is, here's where the decision-making happens, and these are the people that are going to enact it, in my mind, so.
You won't get a consensus at town meeting
Well, and that's the point, that's the point.
to decide.
I think you're right, Mark. You know, if we put together some type of implementation plan, maybe stretched over a period of time, we bring that to the selectmen. They're gonna say up or down.
Right.
And then it would go to the town meeting or,
Right.
you know, for,
Well, I would guess that I'm sorry.
It would go to the town meeting for discussion, doesn't necessarily mean it has to change. But you
Right.
could,
Right.
you could just say, this is the implementation, and
Right, well, it would be like any warrant article where you're reading Conservation Committee recommends to approve, Selectmen recommend to approve, and then you have the discussion at the town meeting, and then that's where the quote-unquote vote up, vote down, go to work scenario stuff comes about. Okay. All right, so that would be something that do we have a feeling on having something else out there on site during the course of the fall, let's say here, as leaves come off, before things get too wet, in order to, you know, go over any of these things and refamiliarize new committee members, or?
Think it can get wetter?
Is anything happening back there, Mark? I saw it looked like there was new stone on the end of the road from last I saw.
I don't know. It's,
Maybe it was, there was bark and things on there before, and I
I
hadn't
think
known
they
it.
put some bark down, and I
Right.
think it hasn't washed out yet.
No, well, maybe the bark washed off and it's back to stone again, I don't know, but in any case.
Well, my brother doesn't own that piece up in there anymore anyway.
Well, correct, and that's what made me wonder whether or not if anything was happening on that piece, that maybe they were improving the road a little bit or something. But that's neither here nor there to this discussion.
Well, it may be.
It may be, right, with
It may
regard
have
to
some
access and things, yep.
Access and impact on, adjacent properties. I mean, we
Correct.
talked about that the last time too.
Right, well, for example, I'm not sure if you were familiar, but we had done work back in the day on the Hibo Town Forest property. And with different improvements and activity and four-wheeling and this and that and trucking back on there on the property, on the road, you now have liberties being taken by the four-wheeling and ATV public on the town forest property, which has created some damage. So you do have concerns about saying if in fact there is work on neighboring properties or on the town forest, what would that do and what's at risk? So those discussions do have to happen, and you do have to be, cognizant of the idea. Again, as a forester, I would like to think we can hopefully prevent some of those abuses while still actually not having a big chunk of ground go fallow, but that's
Right.
really part of the discussion of the committee to figure that out. Yep.
What is the sense of the wildlife in that area? What do we have for?
It's very, there's quite a bit happening out there, actually. The property, as I understood it, and again, this is within the plan too, so I
Yeah,
won't
I'm
go too
sorry.
far into the weeds,
Yeah.
but there are beaver dam bog areas in the back of the property that feed into Heath Brook. So they do then have that in our data check system of the state to where that is headwaters of brook trout water. And the wetlands that have been flooded around it do flow from Town Farm Road south and then cross back under Milton Mills Road down the road below Mark's house, is where that comes out. So you've got all kinds of wetland scenarios back out there. So you have the old farmland community, which has grown back in, which is where the homestead is. It had been, as I understand it, mostly from Wes, our old committee member back in the day. It had been the town poor farm for the long time, and that's why it was Town Farm Road. That was the town poor farm. So he even went back in time and had found records of, haying that the town had done back there through time, which is now a pine forest on the high ground closer over toward the westerly side, somewhat down the hill behind Puddleby's area, let's say. And as you work your way more easterly through the property, it gathers more water, becomes more of a seepy soil scenario, and then you have the wetland areas with beavers and lots of game trails and things like that. So the property had gravel removed off of it back in the 80s, as I understand it, and about at that time was the last it saw logging.
Okay.
So we're now pushing perhaps 40 years from that for work on anything that has happened on the property at all. Obviously, the haying was a long time even before that, right?
We have full-grown pine trees. That
Correct,
was a
yeah.
while.
Right. So that's basically the history of the property, and it's a gorgeous piece. It's got a lot going on with it. Some beautiful woodland sections that are suitable for management, and some sections definitely that are more apt to be protected and not touched for the wetland scenarios and wildlife scenarios, that sort of thing. And finding where all those come together is really where a forester and then this committee can, really make it shine, I feel. But we do have the concerns over, what happens if that road becomes more of a through road to ATVs, and how do we prevent those abuses and things like that.
Is there any way that you can get a large-scale map of the property that we could use to tentatively draw?
Mark it up, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have all the files. I don't have anything larger than a 8.5 by 11 to print anything.
You don't have
on,
a?
No. Maybe your old school district might have.
No.
I could probably get, whether the town, well, I mean, code might have something like that, a larger printing device, perhaps.
I haven't been down there in a long time.
I haven't
so
either.
I don't know.
I'll look into that so we can get a couple of copies of things just to mark right up. So I have everything from the topo maps, the soils maps, and everything like that are included within the plan. So if you start to overlay all these things,
Yeah.
you can see them and conceptually.
like Top Line or one of those
I was gonna say, check
surveying
with
them?
Jen to see where they get that stuff printed.
Yep,
Because
yep.
I've seen some bigger ones before.
I'm quite sure, I mean, if you walk into the code office, obviously the whole walls are covered with them, so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It shouldn't be too hard to find out where that is and just send them a couple of digital files to be printed at a large scale, I would say.
because then that would give us that visual to kind of
Correct.
look at.
Yep. So should we try to put something on the docket to, like I said, get out there here later this fall?
Sure,
Think so?
yeah.
Okay. I'll shoot an email off around that and we'll take a look at the schedule. There'll be the usual,
It's muck
You
boots
know,
or hiking boots, just let me know.
no, it all works for me. I'm in
Leaders.
the woods all year regardless, but, there's the, how much public input will you get if it's during deer season, let's say, or, that whole, or is it gonna be on a weekend, or now that time is apt to change here shortly, could it even be on a weeknight? Not likely, I wouldn't think,
likely,
right? So I'll open up that discussion and we'll try to move that date forward and put something out there.
Okay.
Okay,
And it might not be accessible to drive up.
correct, right.
It's a good size, it's a good hike.
Right, I'll do a little homework. I'll recon the road and see how it goes.
Is it typically susceptible to washing out? Is that the-
Yes. Well, the first few hundred feet is straight up off of the Sanborn
Right, I
Road.
remember that.
And it had a bunch of stone put on there through the
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
Some bark had been put on there, but because it had washed out into and across Sanborn Road.
Oh, okay.
But that had been fixed for a couple of years now. So from the time that we had the last few walks, it was in fact seasonally accessible.
Right.
Well, we've had a
You would
drought,
never want to be up there. I'm sorry?
had a drought for 2 years.
Right, one would think that would work, but then again, come July, we have not had a drought. So we'll see how that continues, I guess. So I don't know if that, I wouldn't tend to think that that has anything to do with a formal time lag need to be posted by Jen. It's not a specific meeting, it's more of a workshop scenario. So if we just find a good time to generate as much opinion in people as we can, then we'll just go with that. It's not gonna have to be, like our meetings here have to be posted up 10 days ahead of time and all that kind of jazz. But if it's not a formal meeting, then it shouldn't have to hold by those standards.
But I think you ought to advertise it as much
Yeah,
as
for sure. No, we will,
Yeah,
yep,
Yeah.
yep. Okay,
It might garner some interest in volunteers too, when we do implement a plan by
Sure.
doing it that way, yeah.
yep. Yep, no, again, we had, I know I was out there with groups at least 3 times, and probably the largest of the group had 10, 12 maybe. And of course, some of those were committee members and families of other town, other committee members of different committees and things like that too, so. No, well, that sounds fine. Do we have any other old or new business we should be trying to schedule up?
I just wanted to ask the question on Goat Hill. We recently walked up there, and it seems to be, there hasn't been a whole lot of cleanup lately, is that correct? Is that something that we are in charge of, or does someone else take care of that?
The last that I had, I'd really have to talk to Carl Davis about that,
Okay.
because he really was the one who championed a lot of that and supervised a lot of the construction.
Right.
So let me make contact with him about that and find out. That piece of land is in fact under the purview of this committee. But because it was small and had such a different, spin on its management style compared to the other 2 town forest pieces particularly, we really hadn't gone through much of a process for it.
What needs to be cleaned up?
Well, there was, it's really just, it's beautiful walk, don't get me wrong. It was just a lot of debris. We picked up a lot of debris, and I was thinking
By
about,
debris, you mean garbage or?
there was a lot of garbage up
Okay.
there.
Really? Oh, at the top?
It was kind of going up on the sides.
on the-
I think we picked up, my husband and I picked up a couple garbage bags full of
Really?
trash.
Well,
Yeah.
People chucking
So-
stuff.
We were there maybe a month ago, and it was
It wasn't bad, yeah.
great.
I don't know what, I don't know, kids maybe, who knows, but I
Okay.
just didn't know if that fell under us.
Right.
Or,
Okay.
because I just saw that and I was like, oh, I wonder
Yep.
if that's something I should bring up, but,
Well, outside of the creation of the parking lot and having our hands in some of the trail construction talk, we really hadn't moved with any of that, so I'll just have to see what the update is from Carl on that one, and not overly familiar. Any other thoughts? Any other business places? Anything else to new pieces of land? I'd like to get back out onto the Hebo-Hibo piece as well and look around back there and just see what's happened out that way.
So has there been some
report back on
four-wheelers
that.
running through it, that type of thing, you mean, or
Yeah,
just heard rumors?
if you know the lay of the land back there, the Hebo-Hibo Road more or less goes down one side of the larger section of the road. There was like 15 acres with an old foundation on the west side of the road, and the larger section of the lot, let's call it 80 acres, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but was on the westerly side. But the headwaters of the Little River, one of the headwaters of Little River, runs south parallel to Hebo-Hibo down there, about 100 feet off of the Hebo-Hibo parallel. Problem is of course, leaves get off and you have old roads that had led up into the property.
Yeah.
So now you get all these, four-wheeler weekend things. And guys are now going, ooh, a trail, and then they go this way, and it comes upon a stream crossing, and then they go, ooh, how about I run down the brook?
Yeah, yeah.
So the last time Carl and I were out there, which was as much as a year and a half ago now, maybe two, there were straight up like 100 and 200 foot sections where they were running their side-by-sides right smack down the middle of the brook and then coming back out onto the road. So leaving the road, running down the brook
Yeah.
as a mud run, and then jumping back onto the road again.
That sounds like fun.
So that's not good. So how one stops that outside of gates or, as far as a four-wheeler goes, you have a really hard time protecting a piece of land from a four-wheeler, side by side perhaps, but, if they're that aggressive about it, it's awful hard to keep
I don't know
things.
who it is, but somebody's got like a campground up in there. I mean, which, if it's their property, it's their, fine, but I don't know if they're part of the problem or not.
I don't know. I don't know.
Do you have a map of that?
I do, yeah. Well, again, I've got a forestry plan for that one as well, so I'll,
Can you share that?
Yep.
Does Jen have that, or,
the old plan.
yeah,
That one is pushing 20 years old, so she may or may not still have it, but I still have it, so.
just a map would work for me.
Yep,
I can figure out the rest.
for sure.
have we talked to because the ATV club in Sanford Springville, the guy who runs it, the chairperson of that, he's pretty easy to talk to, because I've had to talk to him about them, they just go on our land all the time.
Right.
But, and we have goats and stuff back there, so we worry about, that. And he's actually really good to talk to, so maybe that's something we could.
I
talk
can't
about.
remember his name, but I've talked with him as well.
Yeah.
And then what I found, and this may just be my experience with that group, is he is a very well-spoken point man for the organization. However, when the time comes to say, I need you to have your constituents, I don't know what you want to call them,
You remember?
not running on the private property that's being damaged,
I see you.
it starts to fall off on the
Yeah.
responsibility side of things, that, because I've had 4 or 5 woodlots that I've worked on in town that have reported and said, we got these ATVs that are literally going right around the gates. We have if you go over toward, the Emery's Mills Road, straight like across from Ted's and go back down that way, you come into that little sliver of Acton, which goes across Hebo-Hibo and comes all the way out on that section of road. And there is a road that goes from that point called the Old Schoolhouse Rock that goes all the way up to the height of land and back down to the Hebo-Hibo a few miles through the woods away. And so they're doing the same thing there, is they're running up and down the Hebo and hitting woods roads and going all the way out to the pavement out on what I call Emery's Mills Road or Babbling Brook Road, depends on what town you're in is what they call it. But then they're running on these other woodlots along the way, and there's a gate right there.
They just
But
go around them.
gates even have rocks 20 feet off either side, and then that just means it's now 25 feet over that the next crossing is, and when that's got rock is placed, it's 30 feet over after that. So, again, really good guy to talk with, he says all the right things, I just have not found that there's been a lot of legs to the preventive that has happened with that.
It might not be his organization, this is.
And again, it doesn't have to be, I mean, they might not be
Might not be.
members of that group, it could just be whoever running around out there, don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
So he's really good at trying to talk the talk on, well, I think his pitch on those woodlots that I was working with was, well, if you give us a place to ride, then we can hopefully keep them at that location. But then that also becomes a slippery slope of, well, no, you shouldn't be here, but I can't necessarily grant some other trail for you to go on that's not on my property either. And then we have the question of if this actually is town property, to what extent do we have authority for that?
true.
I don't know that either.
Well, I think we could make recommendations that, ATV side-by-sides are limited to whatever, or not allowed, or.
Correct. I would say so, but I'm not meaning to overspeak or overreach.
Right,
Because the same argument can be said for, the talk had come about the potential, I'll call it closure of the Hebo Road to the public, which has been floated around for years. However, in my mind, as a forester or someone who doesn't abuse the use of that land or that road, it had been discontinued, but the easement of the road had been granted back to its center line from the abutters. However, the easement for those who use it and own property on either side of it is not extinguished by the discontinuance of the road by the town.
Right.
So the town has given its right to the road back to its abutters, but, John that has his property a half a mile back in the woods cannot be landlocked or have his right to access his own property retracted because the town has decided that it no longer wants to maintain and discontinue this road. So to that question, where you then go from that point is, and again, this is a legal question that I don't know the answer to, here we have a public piece of property back there that is the town forest. Could an argument be made that thou shalt not keep townspeople
off of town.
off of
property.
town property?
Yeah,
I think you
But
can't
keep 'em out
do
of the
that,
brook,
but you can
But we can
define how it's gonna be used.
The property, yes,
If you don't want four by four or side by sides or
Correct.
four-wheelers, then
right,
you can make that call.
right,
The town can,
right.
not this committee, but the town can.
No, I'm just saying that may be a knee-jerk reaction back, is all I'm saying, right? So you have to go about that with a procedure that'll allow you to actually bring that about and have legs, or, heaven forbid, then you get into the question of enforcement,
right. Right.
so. So yeah, I'll generate a map on that one as well, Mike, and pass that along.
Great. And will you forward me all the plans? so I
By
can
all
take a
means,
look?
yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other old or new business, or any questions of any regard? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Can we discuss, make sure we know when the next meeting is?
Okay, by all means. We are back to the second Monday.
Because next Monday is Columbus.
Next Monday was, yes, it would have been Monday coming up, but for Columbus weekend, Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples' Day.
Indigenous People
Yep.
Day, yes.
So it'd be the 8th, November 8th,
November the 8th, okay.
that's what I have.
Sounds good to me.
And are we gonna be meeting up here, not downstairs?
I don't know, I showed up and this was open and this is where we walked into. Good question. Do you guys have any idea how that works? Like where they put us? How did you guys know that we would be here as opposed to somewhere else in the building? They just said that we'll be here?
I just set up here.
Okay.
The lights are on.
Well, I don't know, though, that well, again, I haven't been down into the code, but in that same room
Yeah.
that we would have walked into before, the code desk is actually there in that room now. So I don't even know that planning board, where we would have met in the past down there, is where the planning board even meets any longer. So presumably it's here.
And I do know they like to record these meetings.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, aren't we on television?
I've never watched this on television, thank God.
Facebook
but-
version.
Used to be. Motion to adjourn?
I second the motion.
Meeting adjourned.